Sometimes the most powerful moments in life happen when someone sees past the uniform, the title, or the appearance to recognize the person beneath. In a world where status and hierarchy often determine how we're treated, there are rare instances when true character shines through the darkness of prejudice and assumption. This is the story of a woman whose dedication went unnoticed for years, a gate guard whose job made him judge too quickly, and a general whose simple gesture changed everything. It's about the moment when respect is finally given where it was always deserved, and how one small coin can carry the weight of a lifetime's worth of recognition. Maria Santos had been walking the same route to the military base for 15 years. Every morning at exactly 6:30, she would leave her small apartment 3 blocks away, carrying her worn leather bag and wearing her simple gray uniform. The fabric had faded over the years and the edges were beginning to fray, but Maria kept it clean and pressed. She took pride in her appearance even if others didn't always notice. The morning sun cast long shadows across the concrete as she approached the main gate of Fort Henderson. The massive iron barriers stood like sentinels, topped with razor wire that glinted in the early light. 2 guard towers flanked the entrance, their windows dark and imposing. This place had been her second home for more than a decade, yet she still felt a flutter of nervousness each time she approached. Behind the reinforced glass of the guard station sat Sergeant Williams. He was a large man with thick shoulders and a permanent scowl that seemed carved into his weathered face. His uniform was crisp, his boots polished to a mirror shine, and his posture spoke of military precision. For 5 years he had been stationed at this gate, and for 5 years he had made Maria's life more difficult than it needed to be. Williams looked up from his newspaper as Maria approached. His eyes narrowed as he took in her appearance, scanning from her worn shoes to her simple hairstyle. There was something in his gaze that always made Maria feel small, as if she were somehow less worthy of being there than anyone else who passed through those gates. "Papers," Williams said without looking up from his desk. His voice was flat, disinterested, as if this daily routine bored him beyond measure. Maria reached into her bag and pulled out her identification card and work permit. "I didn't know what to say." The plastic was scratched from years of handling, and her photo, taken when she was much younger, seemed to stare back at her with hopeful eyes. She slid the documents through the small opening in the bulletproof glass. Williams took his time examining the papers as he did every single day. His thick fingers turned the cards over slowly, checking each corner as if he expected to find some flaw, some reason to deny her entry. Maria stood patiently, her hands clasped in front of her, waiting for the familiar ritual to conclude. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of diesel fuel and military discipline. Around them, other personnel moved with purpose, their boots clicking against the pavement in steady rhythms. Officers strode past with confidence, their uniforms bearing ranks and insignia that commanded immediate respect. Enlisted soldiers hurried by, checking their watches and adjusting their gear, but none of them had to endure the lengthy inspection that Williams insisted on performing with Maria's credentials. "This photo doesn't look much like you anymore," Williams said finally, his voice carrying a hint of suspicion. He held up the identification card, comparing the younger face in the picture to the woman standing before him. Maria felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. She had gained some weight over the years, and gray had begun to streak through her dark hair. The lines around her eyes spoke of long hours and hard work, but she was still the same person who had earned the right to be on this base. "It's only 5 years old," she replied quietly, keeping her voice steady despite the frustration building in her chest. "The security office said it's still valid for another 3 years." Williams grunted, clearly unimpressed with this explanation. He picked up a magnifying glass from his desk and began examining the cards more closely, looking for signs of tampering or forgery. This was new, Maria realized. He had never used the magnifying glass before. Behind her, a line was beginning to form. A young lieutenant shifted impatiently, checking his watch and sighing loudly. 2 maintenance workers stood with their tool bags, whispering to each other about the delay. Maria could feel their eyes on her back, and she knew they were wondering why this simple process was taking so long. "Is there a problem?" the lieutenant finally asked, stepping forward with the kind of authority that came naturally to someone accustomed to being obeyed. Williams looked up quickly, his demeanor changing instantly when he saw the officer's rank. "No, sir, just doing a thorough security check. You know how it is with the civilian staff." The word civilian hung in the air like an insult. Maria felt something twist in her stomach at the tone Williams used, as if being a civilian somehow made her less trustworthy, less worthy of basic respect.
The lieutenant nodded curtly and stepped back, but Maria could see the impatience in his eyes.
She was holding up important people, making them late for important meetings and important duties. She was just the cleaning lady after all. Her time wasn't as valuable as theirs. Williams finally handed her papers back through the slot, but his movements were deliberately slow. "Remember to keep these documents in good condition," he said, his voice carrying a lecturing tone. "Damaged identification could be grounds for denial of access." Maria took her papers with steady hands, though inside she was trembling with frustration. "Thank you," she managed to say, though the words felt bitter on her tongue. She walked through the gates and onto the base proper, her soft-soled shoes making almost no sound on the polished concrete. The buildings around her were massive, built of gray stone and steel, designed to project strength and permanence. Flagpoles rose at regular intervals, the red, white, and blue fabric snapping in the morning breeze. This place held so many memories for her. She remembered her first day 15 years ago when she had been young and eager, grateful for the opportunity to work on such an important facility. She had been widowed just 2 years earlier, left with 2 young children and a pile of medical bills that seemed to grow larger every month.
This is the best restaurant in the U.S. You're, Paisha?
The job at Fort Henderson had been a lifeline. The pay was steady, the benefits were decent, and the work was honest. Maria had thrown herself into her duties with the dedication of someone who understood the value of steady employment. She cleaned offices, maintained common areas, and took pride in keeping the base spotless. Over the years, she had watched young soldiers come and go, seen officers rise through the ranks, and witnessed the endless cycle of military life. She had scrubbed floors, that important feat had walked on, cleaned windows that overlooked strategic planning sessions, and emptied wastebaskets that contained the discarded drafts of crucial documents. But despite her years of faithful service, despite her perfect attendance record and her quiet competence, Maria remained invisible to most of the people who worked on the base. She was part of the background, as unremarkable as the gray walls and polished floors she maintained. She made her way to the supply closet where she kept her cleaning equipment. The room was small and windowless, lined with shelves that held bottles of disinfectant, stacks of cleaning cloths, and the industrial vacuum cleaner that had become her constant companion. This was her domain, the only place on the entire base where she felt truly comfortable. As she gathered her supplies for the day, Maria thought about her children. Carlos was now 22, working as an electrician and saving money for his own place. Sophia was 19, in her second year of college, studying to become a nurse. Both of them had grown up understanding the value of hard work, watching their mother leave early and return late, tired but determined.
The money Maria earned at Fort Henderson had paid for Carlos's trade school and Sophia's tuition.
It had kept food on the table and clothes on their backs. It had provided stability in a world that often seemed designed to knock people down. But the daily humiliation at the gate was wearing on her. Every morning she had to swallow her pride and endure Williams's scrutiny. Every day she was reminded that she was an outsider, someone who didn't quite belong in this world of uniforms and protocol. Maria began her rounds, pushing her cart through the quiet hallways. The floors were already clean from her work the previous day, but military standards demanded perfection. She mopped with careful, methodical strokes, ensuring that every surface gleamed. The base was waking up around her. Doors opened and closed as personnel arrived for duty. Phones began ringing in offices, and the low hum of conversation drifted through the corridors. Maria moved through it all like a ghost, noticed only when something was out of place or when someone needed to step around her cart. She had learned to read the rhythms of the base, to understand which areas would be busy at which times of day. She scheduled her work to avoid important meetings and high-traffic periods. It was a delicate dance, staying out of the way while still maintaining the impossibly high standards that the military demanded. In the administrative wing, she cleaned the offices of colonels and majors, men and women whose decisions affected thousands of people. Their desks held classified documents and strategic plans, phones that connected to the Pentagon and overseas commands. Maria was trusted with access to these spaces, yet she was treated with suspicion at the front gate every single morning. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had undergone extensive background checks to get this job. Her fingerprints were on file with multiple agencies. Her personal history had been examined in detail, her references checked and cross-checked. She had been deemed trustworthy enough to work in the heart of a military installation, yet Williams treated her as if she were a potential security threat. As the morning wore on, Maria found herself thinking about her late husband Roberto. He had been a proud man, someone who believed deeply in service and sacrifice. He had worked construction, building homes and office buildings with his own 2 hands. When he was diagnosed with cancer, he had faced it with the same determination he brought to everything else in his life. Roberto had never lived to see Fort Henderson, but Maria thought he would have been proud of her work there. He had always told her that honest work was nothing to be ashamed of, that dignity came from doing your best regardless of what others might think. But lately, Maria had been wondering if Roberta would understand the price she was paying for this job. The daily humiliation, the constant reminder that she was somehow less than everyone else who walked through those gates. Would he have wanted her to endure Williams's treatment for the sake of a steady paycheck? The morning passed slowly, each task performed with the same careful attention to detail that had characterized Maria's work for 15 years. She cleaned conference rooms where generals planned operations, restrooms used by high-ranking officials, and hallways walked by some of the most important people in the military. But as lunchtime approached, Maria felt the familiar knot of anxiety beginning to form in her stomach. She would have to leave the base for her break, which meant she would have to face Williams again on her way back in. The afternoon scrutiny was often worse than the morning routine, as if he suspected that she might have somehow become less trustworthy during her brief absence. Maria had considered eating lunch on the base to avoid the hassle, but there was no place for civilian staff to purchase food. The commissary was reserved for military personnel and their families. The cafeteria served only those with proper meal cards. She was welcome to work on the base, but not to call it home in any meaningful way. She finished her morning tasks and made her way back toward the main gate, her empty lunch bag in her hand. The sun was higher now, beating down on the concrete and making the air shimmer with heat waves. The guard towers loomed ahead, their windows like dark eyes watching her approach. Williams was still at his post, though he had been joined by another guard for the busier afternoon shift. Corporal Johnson was younger, fresher-faced, but he had learned from Williams's example. Together they formed a formidable barrier between Maria and the world beyond the gate. "Leaving for lunch?" Williams asked as she approached, though he already knew the answer. This question was part of their daily ritual, as predictable as the sunrise. "Yes," Maria replied simply, showing her identification without being asked. Williams examined the card again, though he had looked at it just hours earlier. His routine never varied, never shortened, never showed any sign that he recognized her as someone he had processed hundreds of times before. Behind the glass, Corporal Johnson watched and learned. Maria could see the younger man taking mental notes, absorbing Williams's approach like a student studying under a master. Soon there would be another guard who saw her as a potential threat, another obstacle to overcome twice each day. "Make sure you're back within an hour," Williams said as he finally handed her identification back. New security protocols require stricter adherence to scheduled break times. Maria nodded, though she suspected this was another small cruelty designed specifically for her. She had never been late returning from lunch, never abused her break time, never given anyone reason to doubt her reliability. She walked through the gates and into the civilian world beyond, feeling some of the tension leave her shoulders with each step. Out here, she was just another woman going about her day. No one questioned her right to be where she was or examined her papers with suspicion. Maria walked to the small diner 3 blocks away where she always ate her lunch. The owner, Mrs. Specifically, Chen, had become a friend over the years, someone who knew her story and treated her with the respect that seemed so rare at her workplace.
"The usual, Mrs. Sadby, commenting?"
Chen asked as Maria took her customary seat at the corner table. "Please," Maria replied, allowing herself to smile for the first time that day. As she ate her simple meal of soup and sandwich, Maria watched the world outside the diner window. Civilian life moved at a different pace, with different priorities and different measures of worth. People were judged by their actions rather than their uniforms, their character rather than their rank. But even as she enjoyed this brief respite, Maria knew that soon she would have to return to Fort Henderson. She would have to face Williams again, endure his scrutiny again, and swallow her pride one more time. It was the price she paid for the security her job provided, the cost of keeping her family afloat in an uncertain world. The clock on the diner wall ticked steadily toward 1 o'clock. Soon, it would be time to go back. Maria finished her lunch and checked her watch one final time before standing to leave. Mrs. Chen waved goodbye from behind the counter, her warm smile a stark contrast to what awaited Maria back at the base. The afternoon heat hit her immediately as she stepped outside, the pavement radiating warmth through her worn shoes. The walk back to Fort Henderson felt shorter than usual, though Maria wasn't sure if that was because she was walking faster or because her mind was elsewhere. She had been thinking more and more about looking for another job, something that wouldn't require her to endure the daily humiliation at the gate.
But at 53, with only a high school education and 15 years of cleaning experience, her options were limited.
As she approached the familiar gates, Maria noticed something different. There was a small crowd gathered near the visitor entrance. and several black sedans with government plates were parked along the curb. Military police stood at attention, their white helmets gleaming in the afternoon sun. Something important was happening. Williams and Johnson were both in the guard station, and Maria could see them speaking urgently into their radios. Their usual bored demeanor had been replaced by sharp attention and barely contained nervous energy. This was clearly not an ordinary afternoon. Maria took her place in the short line of people waiting to enter the base. In front of her stood a young private who kept adjusting his uniform and checking his watch. Behind her, two civilian contractors discussed the increased security presence in hushed tones. "Major inspection today," one of the contractors whispered to his companion. "Word is, there's a 3-star general making surprise visits to bases across the region."
Maria felt her stomach tighten.
Increased security always meant increased scrutiny, and Williams would likely be even more thorough than usual in his examination of her credentials. She clutched her identification card a little tighter, mentally preparing herself for an extended interrogation. When her turn came, Williams barely glanced up from his radio. His face was flushed, and beads of sweat had formed on his forehead despite the air conditioning in the guard station. "Papers!" he snapped, more curtly than usual. Maria slid her identification through the slot, noting how Williams's hands shook slightly as he picked it up. His usual deliberate pace was replaced by jerky, hurried movements.
He was nervous, she realized.
The prospect of being observed by senior leadership had rattled his confidence. "This picture really doesn't look like you," Williams said, his voice louder than necessary. Johnson looked over from his own station, drawn by the commotion. "When was this taken?" 5 years ago, Maria replied, keeping her voice calm despite the increased aggression in his tone. "It's still valid according to base security regulations." Williams held up the card to the light, squinting at it as if seeing it for the first time. "The lamination looks damaged here on the edge. Could be tampering." Maria's heart skipped a beat. She looked at the card more closely and saw what he was referring to. A tiny curl in the plastic where the lamination had separated slightly from the backing. It was normal wear and tear, nothing more, but in Williams's current state of mind, it had become grounds for suspicion. "That's just age," Maria said quietly. "The card has been through the security scanner hundreds of times. It's bound to show some wear. I'm going to need to call this in," Williams announced loudly, reaching for his telephone. "Potentially compromised identification requires verification through security." The private in line behind Maria shifted nervously, checking his watch again. More people had gathered, and Maria could feel their impatience growing. She was holding up the line, creating a scene, drawing exactly the kind of attention she had spent 15 years trying to avoid. "Sergeant Williams!" Johnson called from his station, his voice carrying a note of urgency. "We've got movement from the command building." "The general's convoy is heading this way." Williams froze with the phone halfway to his ear. Through the bulletproof glass, Maria could see his mind working, weighing his options. He could continue with his security check and risk having a 3-star general witness him holding up the line, or he could process her quickly and risk missing a potential security threat. The sound of approaching vehicles made the decision for him. 3 black sedans were moving toward the gate at a steady pace, their tinted windows reflecting the afternoon sun. Military police motorcycles flanked the convoy, their red and blue lights flashing silently. Williams slammed the phone down and practically threw Maria's identification back through the slot.
"So, you catametically invented this next business algebra?"
"Move along!" he barked, his attention already shifting to the approaching convoy. Maria hurried through the gate, her heart pounding with relief and residual fear. She had never been so close to being denied entry, never felt so vulnerable to Williams's arbitrary authority. The incident had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. She made her way quickly to the supply closet, wanting to disappear into the familiar routine of her afternoon work. As she gathered her cleaning supplies, she could hear the commotion outside as the general's convoy arrived. Doors slammed, boots clicked on pavement, and voices carried the crisp authority of military command. Maria began her afternoon rounds in the administrative wing, pushing her cart through corridors that now hummed with increased activity. Officers moved with additional purpose, their uniforms freshly pressed and their posture even straighter than usual. Everyone was on their best behavior for the visiting dignitary. She was cleaning a conference room when she first saw him. Through the large windows that overlooked the main courtyard, Maria caught a glimpse of the general as he emerged from his sedan. He was an older man, perhaps in his early 60s, with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. His uniform was immaculate, decorated with ribbons and badges that spoke of a distinguished career. But what struck Maria most was his face. There was something familiar about it, though. She couldn't immediately place where she might have seen him before. He moved with confidence but also with a kind of weariness, as if he had seen too much and carried too many responsibilities on his shoulders. This is the book. It's about history. The general was accompanied by a small entourage of staff officers and aides, all of whom seemed to orbit around him like planets around the sun. They moved through the base with the fluid precision of a well-rehearsed dance, stopping at predetermined locations for brief inspections and consultations. Maria continued her work, keeping one ear tuned to the activity in the corridors. She could hear the general's voice occasionally, a deep baritone that carried authority without being loud or harsh. There was something calming about it, she thought, something that suggested strength tempered by experience. The afternoon wore on, and Maria found herself working in areas that the general's group had recently visited. She cleaned conference rooms where he had held meetings, polished floors that his entourage had walked across, and emptied wastebaskets that contained the notes and drafts from his discussions with base leadership. It was in one of these conference rooms that she found it. Lying on the floor beneath the large oak table was a small object that caught the light as she swept down to pick it up, expecting to find a pen or perhaps a button from someone's uniform. Instead, she found herself holding a military challenge coin. It was heavier than she had expected, made of solid brass and beautifully crafted. One side bore the seal of the United States Army, while the other featured a unit insignia she didn't recognize and the words, "Excellence in Service," engraved around the edge. Maria had heard of challenge coins but had never seen one up close. They were tokens of recognition and belonging in military culture, given to acknowledge exceptional service or to mark membership in elite units. This one was clearly special, well worn from handling and carrying a patina that spoke of age and significance. She looked around the conference room, wondering if someone in the general's party had dropped it. The meeting had ended over an hour ago, and the room had been empty when she arrived. But the coin was obviously valuable, both monetarily and sentimentally. Someone would be looking for it. Maria finished cleaning the room and then made her way to the administrative office that handled lost and found items for the base. The clerk, a young corporal named Martinez, looked up from his computer as she approached. "Found this in conference room B," Maria said, placing the challenge coin on the counter. "Thought someone might be looking for it." Martinez's eyes widened as he saw the coin. He picked it up carefully, turning it over in his hands with obvious reverence. "Do you know who dropped this?" "I think it might have been someone from the general's party," Maria replied. "They were using that room earlier this afternoon." Martinez nodded seriously. "This is definitely not something you want to lose. Let me make some calls and see if I can track down the owner." Maria left the administrative office feeling good about her decision to turn in the coin. She had been tempted to keep it, to add it to the small collection of mementos she had gathered over her years at Fort Henderson. But something about it had made her feel that it belonged to someone who would truly miss it. The rest of her afternoon passed uneventfully. The general's visit had disrupted the normal routine of the base, but by late afternoon things were beginning to return to normal. Maria completed her assigned areas and began preparing to leave for the day. As she made her way toward the main gate, she noticed that the increased security presence had not diminished. Military police still stood at attention, and the guard station remained busy with radio traffic. The general's convoy was still parked near the command building, suggesting that his visit was not yet complete. Williams was still at his post, though he looked even more frazzled than he had that afternoon. His uniform was wrinkled from the heat and stress, and dark circles had formed under his arms. The prospect of a long day under increased scrutiny had clearly taken its toll. Maria approached the guard station with her usual identification ready, hoping for a quick and uneventful departure. But Williams's mood had not improved with the afternoon's events. "End of shift?" he asked, though it was obvious from the timing and Maria's empty hands that she was leaving for the day. "Yes," Maria replied, sliding her identification through the slot. Williams picked up the card with exaggerated care, as if it were evidence in a criminal investigation. "You know, I've been thinking about this damaged lamination. It could be a security risk." Maria felt her heart sink. After 15 years of faithful service, after turning in a valuable challenge coin that she could have kept, after doing everything right and causing no trouble, Williams was going to make her final interaction of the day as difficult as possible. The card was issued by base security, Maria said quietly. "If there were any problems with it, they would have replaced it during my last annual review."
Williams ignored her explanation and picked up his magnifying glass again. He examined the tiny curl in the lamination with forensic intensity, as if it held the secrets of national security.
"Regulations state that any damaged identification must be reported," he said loudly. "I'm going to have to confiscate this and issue you a temporary pass." The words hit Maria like a physical blow.
A confiscated identification card would mean days or weeks of bureaucratic delays. It would mean additional background checks, possible suspension from work, and the very real possibility that her security clearance could be revoked entirely.
Please, Maria said, her voice barely above a whisper. I need this job. My children are counting on me. Williams seemed to take satisfaction in her distress. Should have thought of that before you let your identification get damaged. Behind Maria, another line was forming as other personnel prepared to leave for the day. She could feel their impatience, their annoyance at being held up by what they saw as a simple administrative matter. But for Maria, this was potentially the end of everything she had worked for.
Is there a problem here, Sergeant?
The voice came from behind Maria, deep and authoritative. She turned to see the general approaching the guard station, flanked by two of his aides. His silver hair caught the late afternoon light, and his weathered face showed concern rather than irritation. Williams's demeanor changed instantly. He stood straighter, his voice taking on a formal military tone. Just a routine security check, sir? Potentially compromised identification. The general stepped closer, his eyes moving from Williams to Maria and back again. There was something in his gaze that Maria couldn't identify, a flicker of recognition or understanding. May I see the identification in question, the general asked. Williams hesitated for a moment, clearly uncomfortable with the request, but unable to refuse a direct order from a superior officer. He slid Maria's card through the slot to the general. The general examined the card carefully, turning it over in his hands with the same attention to detail that Williams had shown. But his examination was professional rather than suspicious, thorough rather than hostile. This appears to be in normal condition for a card of this age, the general said finally. The lamination separation is well within acceptable parameters. He handed the card back to Williams, his movement deliberate and final. I believe you can process this individual without further delay. Williams took the card with obvious reluctance. Yes, sir. Of course, sir. As the general prepared to move on, something seemed to catch his attention. He paused, his hand moving to his shirt pocket with the automatic gesture of someone checking for something important. Excuse me, he said, turning back toward Maria. You wouldn't happen to have found a challenge coin today, would you? I seem to have misplaced one. Maria felt a flush of recognition and embarrassment.
Yes, sir. I found it in conference room B this afternoon.
I turned it into the lost and found office. The general's face lit up with obvious relief. Thank you. That coin has significant personal value to me. He turned to one of his aides. Captain Morrison, would you please retrieve my coin from the lost and found? As the aide hurried away, the general looked back at Maria with genuine gratitude. I appreciate your honesty. Not everyone would have turned in something like that. It wasn't mine to keep, Maria replied simply. The general studied her face for a moment, and Maria saw something change in his expression. Recognition dawned slowly, followed by surprise and then something deeper. What's your name? He asked quietly. Maria Santos, sir. The general was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant as if he were remembering something from long ago. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that hadn't been there before. Santos, he repeated. Was your husband Roberto Santos? Roberto, who worked construction in San Diego? Maria's breath caught in her throat. Yes, sir. How did you know him? The general closed his eyes briefly, as if the memory was both precious and painful. Roberto saved my life 25 years ago. I was a young lieutenant then. Roberto and his crew dug me out. Maria felt tears spring to her eyes. Roberto had never mentioned rescuing a soldier, had never talked about being a hero. It would have been just like him to help someone and then never speak of it again.
I tried to find him afterward. The general continued.
I wanted to thank him properly, to make sure he was recognized for what he did, but he had moved and I lost track of him.
He died 12 years ago, Maria said softly.
Cancer. The general's face fell. I'm sorry for your loss. He was a good man, a hero in every sense of the word.
Captain Morrison returned with the challenge coin, handing it to the general with obvious relief.
The general took it but didn't put it away immediately. Instead, he looked at it thoughtfully, as if making a difficult decision. Mrs. Santos, he said finally, this coin represents excellence in service. It's given to recognize those who go above and beyond in their duty. He held the coin out to Maria, his gesture formal but his eyes warm with emotion. Your husband exemplified that excellence 25 years ago when he saved my life. You've exemplified it today with your honesty and integrity. I can think of no one more deserving of this recognition. Maria stared at the coin, unable to speak. The brass gleamed in the afternoon light, and she could see the care with which it had been crafted. But more than its material value was what it represented: acknowledgement, respect, belonging. "I can't take this," she whispered. "Yes, you can," the general said firmly. "And you will. This is long overdue." Williams watched from behind his bulletproof glass, his face a mixture of confusion and dawning understanding. The civilian cleaning lady he had been harassing was the widow of someone who had saved a general's life. The woman whose identification he had been about to confiscate was being honored by one of the highest-ranking officers in the army.
5 of the people, the first one.
Maria took the challenge coin with trembling hands, feeling its weight and warmth. For the first time in 15 years, someone in authority at Fort Henderson was treating her with the respect she had always deserved. "Thank you," she managed to say, though the words felt inadequate for the moment. The general smiled, the expression transforming his weathered features. "Thank you, Mrs. Ogle Santos, for everything."
The weight of the challenge coin in Maria's palm felt like it carried the weight of 25 years of unspoken gratitude. As the general's convoy disappeared into the evening light, Maria stood outside the guard station, still processing what had just happened.
The brass was warm against her skin, and she could feel the raised edges of the engraved words beneath her fingers. Williams emerged from the guard station, his usual confidence replaced by something that looked remarkably like shame. His face was pale, and he avoided making eye contact as he approached Maria. The transformation was striking. This man who had spent years wielding his small amount of power over her now seemed diminished, uncertain. "Mrs. Santos," he began, his voice lacking its usual authority, "I owe you an apology." Maria looked at him, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time.
Without his uniform and his bulletproof glass barrier, Williams was just a middle-aged man who had let his position go to his head.
The realization came to her that his treatment of her had probably said more about his own insecurities than about any real security concerns. "I've been doing this job wrong," Williams continued, his words coming slowly as if each one was difficult to say. "I let the rules become more important than the people they're supposed to protect. I forgot that everyone who comes through that gate has a story, has value." Maria clutched the challenge coin tighter, drawing strength from its presence. For so many years, she had absorbed Williams's treatment without complaint, accepting it as the price she had to pay for her job. But the general's recognition had changed something fundamental. She no longer felt like an outsider begging for permission to enter, but like someone who belonged.
Why? She asked simply.
"Why did you make it so hard for me every day?" Williams looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot.
I thought I was being thorough, following proper procedures.
"But if I'm honest," he paused, searching for words, "I guess I saw you as different. Civilian staff, not really part of the military family. I thought that meant you needed extra scrutiny. I've been coming through that gate for 15 years. Maria said quietly, "I've been cleaned and cleared by every security agency you can imagine. I've been trusted with access to classified areas, sensitive documents, the offices of high-ranking officers, but you treated me like a threat." The truth of her words hung between them. Williams had no defense, no justification that could stand up to the simple facts. Maria had been exemplary in every aspect of her service except for the one thing she couldn't control. She wasn't wearing a uniform.
I was wrong, Williams said finally. Completely wrong.
"And I'm sorry." Maria studied his face, looking for signs of sincerity. She had heard apologies before from people who were simply sorry they had been caught, not sorry for their actions.
Whether it's a biology about what I did the second,
But something in Williams's expression suggested genuine remorse. "Apology accepted," she said after a moment, "but things need to change." Williams nodded emphatically. "They will. I promise you that." As Maria walked home that evening, the challenge coin secure in her pocket, she felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. The familiar streets seemed brighter somehow, as if a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying had been lifted from her shoulders. Her small apartment welcomed her with its modest furnishings and family photos. Pictures of Carlos and Sophia at various ages smiled down from the walls, reminders of why she had endured so much for so long. But tonight, she had something new to add to her collection of treasures. Maria placed the challenge coin on her kitchen table and sat down to really look at it. The craftsmanship was exquisite, every detail carefully rendered, but more than its physical beauty was what it represented. Recognition of worth, acknowledgement of service, proof that her years of dedication had meaning. She thought about Roberto and wondered what he would have made of the day's events. He had never told her about rescuing a young lieutenant from a building collapse, had never claimed credit for being a hero. It was so like him to perform an act of courage and then simply go back to work as if nothing had happened. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. Sophia's voice came through the receiver, bright with the energy of youth and education. "Hi, Mama. How was your day? You sound different somehow." Maria smiled, hearing the concern and love in her daughter's voice. "It was a good day, mija. A very good day." She told Sophia about the general's visit, about finding the coin and returning it, about learning the connection to Roberto. As she spoke, she could hear the amazement in her daughter's voice, the pride that came from learning something new and wonderful about the father she had lost so young. "Papa was always a hero to us," Sophia said when Maria finished the story. "But it's nice to know that others saw it too." After hanging up, Maria called Carlos to share the news. His reaction was more subdued, but no less meaningful. As the older child, he had clearer memories of Roberto and understood more fully what his father's sacrifice had meant to their family.
"You're a hero too, Mama," Carlos said quietly.
"Working all these years to take care of us, putting up with everything you've had to put up with. Papa would be proud of you." That night, Maria placed the challenge coin on her bedside table where she could see it. The brass caught the light from the street lamp outside her window, a constant reminder that her work had value, that her service mattered. The next morning brought a different experience entirely. As Maria approached the main gate of Fort Henderson, she noticed that Williams was standing outside the guard station rather than sitting behind his desk. He was waiting for her, she realized, making a visible effort to change their daily routine. "Good morning, Mrs. Santos," he said as she approached. His voice was formal but respectful, lacking the dismissive tone she had grown accustomed to. "Good morning, Sergeant Williams." Williams gestured toward the guard station. "I've made some changes to our procedures. I think you'll find the process much more efficient now." Indeed, the inspection of her credentials took less than 30 seconds. Williams examined her identification with professional competence rather than suspicious hostility. There was no magnifying glass, no extended interrogation, no implication that she was somehow unworthy of access.
"You beat it into magazine, assholes."
"Have a good day," Williams said as he handed her papers back. "Thank you," Maria replied, and for the first time in 5 years, she meant it. As she walked onto the base, Maria noticed other changes as well. The administrative staff she encountered seemed more aware of her presence, more likely to acknowledge her with a nod or a greeting. Word of the general's recognition had spread, as word always did in the close-knit environment of a military installation. In the administrative wing, Colonel Peters emerged from his office as Maria was cleaning the corridor outside. She had seen him countless times over the years, but he had never spoken to her directly. "Mrs. Santos," he said, causing Maria to stop and turn. "I heard about what happened yesterday with General Morrison. I wanted to thank you personally for your integrity in returning his challenge coin." Maria felt a flush of pride at the recognition. "It was the right thing to do, sir."
"Yes, it was," Colonel Peters agreed. "And I understand that General Morrison learned of your connection to your late husband."
"Please accept my condolences for your loss and my gratitude for your family's service." The conversation was brief, but its impact was profound. Maria continued her work with a renewed sense of purpose, understanding that she was no longer invisible, no longer just part of the background.
During her lunch break, Mrs. Essie
Chen at the diner immediately noticed the change in Maria's demeanor. The older woman had known Maria for years and had watched her struggle with the daily humiliations at the base. "You look different today," Mrs. Chen observed as she set down Maria's usual lunch. "Lighter somehow." Maria told her about the previous day's events, showing her the challenge coin with obvious pride. "Mrs. Connors," Chen held it carefully, turning it over in her weathered hands. "This is beautiful," she said. "But more beautiful is that someone finally saw you for who you really are." As the days passed, Maria began to understand the full significance of what had happened. The challenge coin was more than just a token of appreciation. It was a key that had unlocked recognition and respect that had been withheld for far too long. Williams, true to his word, had completely changed his approach to security procedures. He processed Maria's credentials with the same efficiency he showed to military personnel. More importantly, he had begun treating all civilian staff with greater respect, recognizing that his previous approach had been both unnecessary and harmful. Other changes followed. The base commander, having heard the story from General Morrison, instituted a new policy recognizing the contributions of long-term civilian employees. Maria was among the first to be honored under the new program, receiving a certificate of appreciation for her 15 years of faithful service. The ceremony was small but meaningful. Maria stood in the same conference room where she had found the general's coin, surrounded by officers and administrators who had worked alongside her for years,
but had never truly seen her.
As the base commander read the citation, acknowledging her dedication and professionalism, Maria thought about how far she had come from that frightened widow who had first walked through the gates 15 years earlier.
But perhaps the most meaningful change was in how Maria saw herself.
The challenge coin had given her something she hadn't realized she was missing. Proof that her work mattered, that her service had value, that she belonged in the place where she had spent so much of her life. She began carrying the coin with her every day, not as a talisman but as a reminder. When younger civilian employees came to her with complaints about their treatment, she was able to offer both sympathy and hope.
Change was possible, she told them.
Respect could be earned, and recognition could come sometimes from the most unexpected sources.
The coin also connected her to Roberto in a way she hadn't expected.
Through General Morrison's gratitude, she learned more about the kind of man her husband had been, the quiet heroism that had defined his character. The young Lieutenant Roberto had saved had gone on to serve with distinction for 30 years, leading soldiers in combat and peace, making decisions that affected thousands of lives. In saving one man, Roberto had indirectly influenced countless others. The general's career had touched every corner of the military, from the strategic decisions made in Pentagon conference rooms to the tactical operations carried out on foreign battlefields. Roberto's moment of courage had rippled through time in ways he never could have imagined. Maria began to see her own work in a similar light. Every office she cleaned, every floor she mopped, every small task she performed with care and precision contributed to the larger mission of the base. The basest of the dead is to capture the support of the common sense. She was part of something bigger than herself, a vital component of the military's ability to function effectively.
The recognition had also opened doors for her children.
When Carlos applied for a position with a defense contractor, his connection to Maria's story helped set him apart from other candidates. Sophia was able to secure an internship at a military hospital, drawn by her mother's example of service and dedication.
Both children understood now that their mother had been carrying on their father's legacy in her own quiet way. Roberto had served through construction and rescue, building and saving. Maria had served through maintenance and care, cleaning and preserving. Both had understood that dignity came from honest work, performed with integrity. As weeks passed and the initial excitement of the general's visit faded, Maria settled into a new normal. The daily routine remained largely the same, but the context had changed completely. She was no longer an outsider seeking permission to enter her workplace. She was a valued member of the Fort Henderson community, someone whose contributions were recognized and appreciated. The challenge coin remained on her bedside table each night and in her pocket each day, a tangible reminder that sometimes recognition comes from the most unexpected directions, that years of quiet service can be acknowledged in a single moment, and that the simple act of doing what's right can connect us to stories much larger than our own. Standing at her kitchen window one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and red, Maria reflected on how much her life had changed since that afternoon when she found a lost coin. The brass token had done more than just connect her to her husband's heroic moment. It had transformed her understanding of her own worth and her place in the world. Tomorrow would bring another day of work, another opportunity to serve with pride rather than resignation. The gates of Fort Henderson would open for her, as they had for 15 years, but now she would walk through them as someone who belonged, someone whose service mattered, someone worthy of the respect she had always deserved. The challenge coin had challenged more than just her expectations. It had challenged an entire system of assumptions about worth and recognition, proving that sometimes the most important stories are written not in military records or official histories, but in the quiet moments when one person chooses to see the full humanity of another.
3 months after receiving the general's challenge coin, Maria found herself in a position she had never imagined possible.
The base commander had asked her to speak at the monthly civilian employee meeting, sharing her story as an example of the values the military sought to promote among all personnel, regardless of their uniform status. Standing before an audience of janitors, maintenance workers, food service staff, and administrative assistants, Maria felt nervous but determined. These were her people, the invisible backbone of the military installation, who kept everything running smoothly while the uniformed personnel focused on their missions.
15 years ago, I walked through the gates of Fort Henderson for the first time.
Maria began, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach.
I was a widow with 2 young children, desperate for steady work and honest pay. I thought I was just looking for a job, but I found something much more important. I found my calling. She told them about Roberto's heroic moment 25 years earlier, about her years of dedicated service despite daily humiliations, about the morning she found a lost challenge coin and made the simple decision to return it to its rightful owner. As she spoke, she could see recognition in their faces, understanding from people who had faced similar challenges and disrespect. The coin didn't change who I was, Maria continued, holding up the brass token so everyone could see it. I was the same person the day before I found it as I was the day after. What changed was that someone finally saw my worth, recognized my contribution, and acknowledged that my service mattered. After her speech, Maria was approached by dozens of her colleagues. Stories poured out, tales of small slights and daily indignities that echoed her own experience. But there were also stories of pride, of satisfaction in work well done, of quiet moments when their efforts had made a real difference in the lives of the military personnel they served. Carmen Rodriguez, who worked in food service, told Maria about preparing meals for soldiers departing for dangerous deployments, knowing that her care in the kitchen might be connected to someone's last good meal before heading into harm's way. David Kim, a maintenance worker, described fixing a heating system in married quarters just before a blizzard, ensuring that military families stayed warm and safe.
These were the unsung heroes of Fort Henderson, Maria realized.
They were the people who made it possible for the military to focus on its primary mission by taking care of 1,000 small but essential tasks. They deserved recognition just as much as the soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines who wore the uniform. The meeting planted a seed that would grow into something much larger. Within weeks, Maria found herself working with base leadership to develop a comprehensive recognition program for civilian employees. The initiative drew attention from military installations across the region, all seeking ways to better appreciate their civilian workforce. General Morrison, who had remained in contact with Maria through occasional letters and phone calls, became an unexpected ally in this effort. His influence helped secure resources and attention for what became known as the Santos Initiative, named in honor of both Maria and Roberto's legacy of service. The program established annual awards for civilian employees, created mentorship opportunities for career advancement, and most importantly, implemented sensitivity training for all personnel about the valuable contributions made by non-military staff. Williams surprisingly became one of the program's strongest advocates, using his own transformation as an example of how attitudes could change. But the most meaningful change for Maria was personal rather than institutional. Deepen had deepened as they came to understand the full scope of their mother's contributions. Carlos had been promoted to supervisor at his electrical contracting company, and he credited his work ethic and attention to detail to lessons learned from watching his mother's dedication. Sophia was thriving in her nursing program, drawn to the field partly by her mother's example of caring service. She had chosen to specialize in veterans' health care, wanting to continue the family tradition of serving those who served their country.
You taught us that there's honor in any honest work, Sophia told her mother one evening as they shared dinner. But more than that, you taught us that integrity isn't about what people see you do.
It's about who you are when no one is watching. The wisdom in her daughter's words struck Maria deeply. For 15 years, she had maintained her standards and values even when they went unrecognized and unrewarded. The challenge coin hadn't created her integrity. It had simply made it visible to others. As autumn approached, Maria received an unexpected invitation. General Morrison was retiring after 31 years of service, and he had specifically requested that Maria attend his retirement ceremony. The event would be held at the Pentagon, with dignitaries from across the military hierarchy in attendance.
The invitation came with travel arrangements and accommodations, all provided at the general's personal expense.
Maria had never been to Washington, D.C., had never imagined herself in the corridors of American military power.
The prospect was both exciting and intimidating.
Carlos and Sophia insisted on accompanying her, taking time off from work and school to witness their mother being honored at such a significant event. For all of them, it represented a culmination of years of sacrifice and quiet service finally receiving its due recognition.
Was at the same time the Duke was going down to recognition.
The flight to Washington was Maria's first time on an airplane. As she looked out the window at the patchwork of fields and cities below, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a frightened widow struggling to support her children to an honored guest at a Pentagon ceremony, the path had been longer and more winding than she could have imagined. The Pentagon itself was overwhelming in its scale and significance. The massive building seemed to stretch endlessly, its corridors filled with the echoing footsteps of military personnel from every branch of service. Maria felt small among the uniforms and insignia, but she also felt proud to be there, to represent the thousands of civilian employees who served alongside the military without seeking glory. The retirement ceremony was held in one of the Pentagon's grand halls, with hundreds of guests in attendance. Maria and her children were seated in a place of honor, close enough to see the detail in the decorations and hear every word of the speeches. When General Morrison took the podium for his farewell address, his eyes found Maria in the crowd. He spoke about leadership, about service, about the importance of recognizing excellence wherever it was found. But near the end of his speech, he told a story that brought tears to Maria's eyes. 31 years ago, I was a young lieutenant, trapped under the rubble of a collapsed building. The general said, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed hall. A construction worker named Roberto Santos risked his own life to dig me out. Roberto saved my life that day, but he gave me something even more precious than that. He gave me an example of what real courage looks like. The general's gaze moved to Maria again, his expression warm with gratitude and respect. Roberto's widow, Maria Santos, has spent 15 years exemplifying that same courage. Not the dramatic kind that gets written about in newspapers, but the quiet, daily kind that makes civilization possible. She has shown me that heroes come in many forms, and that sometimes the most important acts of service happen when no one is watching. The applause that followed was thunderous, with hundreds of military officers and civilian dignitaries rising to their feet in recognition of Maria's contributions. She felt overwhelmed by the attention, but also deeply moved by the acknowledgement of her worth. After the ceremony, Maria was introduced to dozens of high-ranking officials, each of whom expressed appreciation for her service and interest in the Santos Initiative. The Secretary of the Army spoke with her at length about expanding the program to installations worldwide, ensuring that civilian employees everywhere received the recognition they deserved. But the most meaningful moment came when General Morrison presented Maria with a special gift. It was a shadow box containing his own service medals and ribbons, along with a plaque dedicating the display to Roberto and Maria Santos for their family's legacy of service.
Your husband saved one life, the general said as he made the presentation.
But through his example and yours, you've both influenced thousands of lives. This belongs in your home, as a reminder that service takes many forms but always deserves honor. The flight home was quieter than the trip to Washington, all three family members processing the significance of what they had experienced. Maria clutched the shadow box carefully, understanding that it represented not just recognition of her own service, but acknowledgement of Roberto's sacrifice and their children's promising futures. Back at Fort Henderson, word of Maria's Pentagon experience had spread throughout the base. When she returned to work the following Monday, she was greeted with congratulations from colleagues and superiors alike. Even the base commander took time to personally welcome her back and express pride in her representation of the installation. Williams approached her at the gate with obvious emotion in his voice. "Mrs. Santos, I saw the news coverage of the general's retirement. I wanted you to know how proud I am to work alongside someone like you." The transformation in their relationship was complete. The man who had once made her daily life miserable had become one of her strongest supporters. Proof that people could change when they chose to see beyond their prejudices and assumptions. As Maria settled back into her routine, she realized that the challenge coin had done more than just change her life. It had started a ripple effect that was still spreading, touching the lives of civilian employees across the military, inspiring recognition programs, and demonstrating the power of simple human decency. The coin itself remained her constant companion, a reminder of the moment when everything changed. But Maria understood now that the real treasure wasn't the brass token in her pocket. It was the knowledge that her life had meaning, that her work had value, and that sometimes the most important recognition comes not from seeking it, but from simply being worthy of it when it finally arrives. Years later, when new civilian employees came to work at Fort Henderson, they would hear Maria's story as part of their orientation. They would learn about the woman who spent 15 years being overlooked and disrespected, who found a lost challenge coin and returned it out of simple honesty, and who discovered that her husband's heroism had created a connection spanning decades. But more than the details of her story, they would understand its deeper message, that every person has worth, that every job performed with integrity has dignity, and that recognition may be delayed but it is never truly withheld from those who deserve it. Maria Santos had walked through the gates of Fort Henderson for 15 years as an invisible servant. She would continue walking through those same gates for years to come, but now she walked as a recognized hero, a living example of the truth that service comes in many forms and all of them matter. The challenge coin in her pocket was no longer just a piece of brass and recognition from a grateful general. It had become a symbol of hope for anyone who had ever felt overlooked, undervalued, or unseen. It proved that sometimes the smallest acts of integrity can unlock the greatest rewards, and that the most important battles are often won not with weapons or strategies, but with simple human decency and the courage to do what's right regardless of who's watching. In the end, Maria's story became part of Fort Henderson's legacy, told and retold as an example of the values the military sought to embody. But for Maria herself, the real victory wasn't in the recognition or the programs or the ceremonies. It was in the knowledge that she had remained true to herself through 15 years of challenge, that she had raised children who understood the value of integrity, and that she had honored Roberto's memory by serving others with the same quiet heroism he had shown 25 years earlier. The gate guard had refused her entry to respect, but the general's coin had opened doors that would never close again, and in walking through those doors, Maria had proven that sometimes the most important journeys begin with the simple decision to do the right thing. Even when no one else is watching, even when the recognition seems impossible, even when the only reward is the quiet satisfaction of knowing you've lived up to your own standards. That, perhaps, was the greatest lesson of all. That we don't serve for the recognition we might receive, but for the person we become in the serving. The challenge coin had simply made visible what had always been true about Maria Santos. She had always been worthy of respect, worthy of recognition, worthy of honor. It had just taken the right moment and the right person to help the world see what had always been there. 5 years had passed since the day Maria Santos found General Morrison's challenge coin, and Fort Henderson had become a different place entirely. The Santos Initiative had grown far beyond what anyone had imagined, spreading to military installations across 3 continents and affecting the lives of tens of thousands of civilian employees. Maria, now 68 years old, had been promoted to Director of Civilian Employee Relations, a position created specifically for her and her unique understanding of the challenges faced by non-military personnel on military installations. Her office was in the administration building, with windows that overlooked the main gate where she had endured so many years of daily humiliation. From her desk, she could see the memorial garden that had been established in honor of Roberto Santos and other civilian heroes. The centerpiece was a bronze statue of a construction worker helping a fallen soldier to his feet, with an inscription reading, "Service takes many forms." The garden had become a place of reflection and inspiration, visited by personnel from around the world who came to learn about the Santos Initiative. But Maria's greatest pride wasn't in the programs or the recognition or even the statue. It was in the letters she received daily from civilian employees, whose lives had been transformed by the culture of respect that had taken root throughout the military. Each story reminded her of her own journey, and reinforced her belief that everyone deserved to be treated with dignity regardless of their uniform or lack thereof. One particular morning brought news that would mark another milestone in Maria's remarkable journey. Carlos, now 37 and a successful electrical contractor with his own company, called to tell her that he had been selected to bid on a major project at the Pentagon. The contract would involve upgrading the electrical systems in the same building where his mother had been honored at General Morrison's retirement ceremony.
Can you imagine, Mama? Carlos said, his voice filled with excitement and pride.
Your son working in the Pentagon, continuing the family tradition of service in his own way. Sophia, now 34, had achieved her dream of becoming a head nurse at the Veterans Administration Hospital in San Diego. She specialized in treating combat veterans with post-traumatic stress, drawn to the work by her understanding of how service could leave invisible wounds that required patient, dedicated care to heal.
Both children had chosen careers that honored their father's memory and their mother's example, proving that the legacy of service could take many forms across generations.
They had learned from Maria that dignity came not from the work you did, but from how you did it, not from the recognition you received, but from the integrity you maintained even when no one was watching.
Williams, meanwhile, had become one of Maria's closest allies and friends. The transformation that had begun the day General Morrison intervened at the gate had continued over the years, turning the former adversary into a passionate advocate for fair treatment of all personnel. He had been promoted to security chief and had implemented protocols that ensured no civilian employee would ever again face the kind of systematic disrespect Maria had endured.
I learned more about leadership from watching you handle those 15 years than I did in all my military training, Williams told Maria during one of their regular coffee meetings. You showed me that real strength isn't about having power over others.
It's about maintaining your dignity even when others try to take it away. The conversation took place in the base's new Civilian Employees Center, a facility that provided professional development opportunities, career counseling, and social support for non-military staff. The center had been funded through the Santos Initiative and bore a plaque dedicating it to the memory of Roberto Santos and the service of his widow. As Maria walked through the center, she marveled at the changes that had occurred. Civilian employees now received regular recognition for their contributions, with monthly awards ceremonies and annual banquets celebrating their achievements. Career advancement programs helped custodial staff move into administrative roles, maintenance workers become supervisors, and food service employees pursue management positions. The center also housed a small museum documenting the history of civilian contributions to military readiness. Roberto's story was prominently featured, alongside dozens of other accounts of civilian heroism and dedication. Visitors could learn about the construction workers who built military installations under dangerous conditions, the administrative staff who worked around the clock during crises, and the countless support personnel whose quiet competence made military operations possible. But perhaps the most meaningful display was a simple glass case containing Maria's original worn identification card alongside General Morrison's challenge coin. The exhibit told the story of how one woman's integrity and one general's recognition had sparked a revolution in how the military viewed its civilian partners. The story had attracted attention far beyond military circles. Maria had been invited to speak at corporate conferences, university leadership programs, and community organizations about the power of recognition and the importance of treating all employees with respect. Her message was simple but profound. Everyone has dignity, everyone contributes value, and everyone deserves to be seen for who they truly are.
One of her most memorable speaking engagements had been at a conference for human resources professionals in Chicago.
After her presentation about the Santos Initiative, a woman in the audience approached her with tears in her eyes. "I'm a janitor at a major corporation." The woman said, "For years I've been invisible to the executives and managers just like you were at the base. Your story gives me hope that things can change, that maybe someday my contributions will be recognized too."
Maria had stayed after the conference to talk with the woman at length, sharing strategies for maintaining dignity in the face of disrespect and encouraging her to document her contributions in ways that would be visible to management. 6 months later, she received a letter from the woman reporting that she had been promoted to supervisor of custodial services at her company.
These individual victories mattered as much to Maria as the large-scale institutional changes. Each person who found their voice, each employee who received overdue recognition, each workplace that became more respectful and inclusive represented a small triumph over the forces that sought to diminish human worth based on arbitrary hierarchies. The 5th anniversary of finding the challenge coin was marked by a special ceremony at Fort Henderson. General Morrison, now enjoying retirement but still engaged with military affairs, returned to the base to participate in the celebration. The ceremony recognized not just Maria's contributions but the achievements of the entire Santos Initiative program. The guest list included civilian employees from military installations around the world, corporate executives who had implemented similar recognition programs, and academic researchers studying the impact of workplace respect on productivity and morale. It was a gathering that would have been impossible to imagine 5 years earlier, when Maria was still being subjected to daily humiliation at the front gate.
During the ceremony, General Morrison shared additional details about the day Roberto had saved his life.
The building collapse had been the result of an earthquake, and several construction workers had risked their own safety to rescue trapped victims. Roberto had organized the rescue effort, directing other workers and personally extracting 3 people from the rubble, including the young lieutenant who had become a general.
"Roberto Santos didn't just save my life that day," General Morrison told the assembled crowd. "He taught me what leadership looked like. He showed me that real heroes don't wait for someone to tell them what to do. They see what needs to be done and they do it, regardless of the personal cost."
The general then revealed that he had spent years researching Roberto's life after the rescue, learning about his work ethic, his dedication to his family, and his quiet acts of service to his community. Roberto had coached Little League Baseball, volunteered at his church, and helped elderly neighbors with home repairs, all while working full-time construction and raising 2 children as a widower.
"Maria Santos embodies the same spirit of service that defined her husband," the general continued. "For 15 years, she maintained the highest standards of professionalism while enduring treatment that would have broken a lesser person. She found my lost challenge coin and returned it, not because she expected recognition, but because it was the right thing to do." In that simple act, she revealed the character that her husband had shown 25 years earlier.
As part of the anniversary celebration, a new tradition was established. Each year, Fort Henderson would select a civilian employee to receive the Roberto Santos Award for Excellence in Service.
The recipient would be chosen not for a single dramatic act, but for consistent demonstration of integrity, dedication, and professionalism over time. The first recipient was Carmen Rodriguez from Food Services, the woman who had shared her story with Maria after the civilian employee meeting years earlier. Carmen had worked at the base for 18 years, consistently going above and beyond her duties to ensure that military personnel were well fed and cared for. Her nomination letter detailed hundreds of small acts of service, staying late to prepare special meals for soldiers with dietary restrictions, organizing birthday celebrations for personnel far from home, and maintaining the highest standards of cleanliness and food safety. As Carmen accepted her award, tears streaming down her face, Maria was transported back to her own moment of recognition 5 years earlier. The feeling of finally being seen, finally being valued, finally being acknowledged for years of faithful service was something that never lost its power to move both the recipient and the witnesses. The ceremony concluded with the dedication of a new addition to the memorial garden, a reflection wall containing thousands of names of civilian employees who had served with distinction at military installations around the world. Maria's name was engraved in a place of honor, alongside her husband's and hundreds of others whose contributions had too long gone unrecognized. This is the biggest failure. Die Santiago. This is the biggest failure and the place of civilian men. But for Maria, the most meaningful moment came after the formal ceremony ended. A young woman approached her, introducing herself as Lieutenant Sarah Chen, a recent graduate of West Point who had been assigned to Fort Henderson as her first duty station.
Mrs. Santos, Lieutenant Chen said, I wrote my senior thesis about the Santos's initiative and its impact on military culture.
I want you to know that your story changed how I think about leadership. Because of your example, I've committed to ensuring that every person under my command, regardless of their rank or role, is treated with the respect they deserve. In that moment, Maria understood the true scope of what had begun with a lost challenge coin and a simple decision to do the right thing. The ripple effects of recognition and respect were spreading through time and across organizations, touching lives that she would never know about but whose trajectories had been altered by her example. As evening fell and the crowds dispersed, Maria found herself alone in the memorial garden, standing before the statue of Roberto helping the fallen soldier. The bronze figures seemed to glow in the soft light of the setting sun. She thought about the journey that had brought her to this point, the years of struggle as a young widow, the daily humiliations at the front gate, the moment of recognition that had changed everything, and the work that had followed to ensure that others wouldn't have to endure what she had experienced. The challenge coin was still in her pocket, as it had been every day for the past 5 years, but its meaning had evolved over time. What had begun as a token of one general's gratitude had become a symbol of hope for everyone who had ever felt overlooked or undervalued. It represented the possibility of recognition, the power of integrity, and the truth that service comes in many forms. As Maria walked home that evening, past the guard station where Williams now greeted every civilian employee with respect and professionalism, she reflected on the lessons learned over a lifetime of service.
She had discovered that dignity couldn't be taken away by others, only surrendered by oneself. She had learned that recognition, while precious when it comes, shouldn't be the motivation for doing what's right.
I am the god of the Zeuson night.
Most importantly, she had come to understand that sometimes the greatest victories are won not through conflict, but through the simple persistence of maintaining one's values in the face of adversity. The next morning would bring another day of work, another opportunity to serve, another chance to make a difference in the lives of the people around her. Maria Santos would walk through the gates of Fort Henderson as she had for 20 years, but now she walked as a recognized leader, a respected advocate, and a living example of the truth that every person matters, every contribution has value, and every act of service deserves honor. The challenge coin had started it all, but the real treasure had been there all along. The quiet strength that had sustained her through years of struggle, the integrity that had guided her decisions, and the love for her family and community that had motivated her service. These qualities hadn't made her famous, but they had made her invaluable. They hadn't brought her immediate recognition, but they had built a legacy that would outlast any monument or memorial. In the end, Maria Santos had proven that heroism doesn't always announce itself with fanfare and ceremonies. Sometimes it whispers its presence through decades of faithful service, through the choice to maintain dignity in difficult circumstances, and through the simple decision to do what's right even when no one else is watching. And sometimes, if we're very fortunate, the world eventually learns to hear that whisper and to honor the quiet heroes who make everything else possible. The gate that had once been a barrier had become a doorway to recognition and respect. But Maria had learned that the most important gates are the ones we open within ourselves. The choice to see our own worth, the the decision to maintain our values regardless of external validation, and the commitment to service that asks for nothing in return except the satisfaction of work well done. The challenge coin remained in her pocket, warm against her palm, a reminder not just of one moment of recognition, but of a lifetime of choices that had led to that moment, and all the moments that followed.
It was proof that sometimes the smallest objects can carry the greatest meaning, and that the most important transformations often begin with the simpler,